everybody, and welcome to Metaphysical Insights. I would like to introduce to you today my very special guest, Tim Robey. Tim is the real deal archaeologist. Um, your degrees are in archaeology, that was your profession.
Yeah,
Um, I say was because Tim is retired right now. He's also an incredible author. He's done blogs and magazine articles, not to mention, um, and I'm looking because I thought I had a copy of the first book right by me because I was going to hold it up, but aha, that's Tim's first book that came out, what, 2 or 3 years ago?
oh, 4 years ago now.
Four
Yeah,
years ago.
four
Okay.
years ago this month.
And the sequel has just come. Well, is it fair to call it a sequel?
Yes, it is. Yeah,
Okay.
that's the sequel. Trying to work out how the camera works on this.
Okay.
Uh,
Yeah, the heart of the world. Oh, that's
yeah.
excellent.
So the first book was the story of the Amesbury Archer. This
Right.
is the story of his adopted son, his nephew, uh, and it takes place about 16 years um, after the events of the first book. So it's a straight sequel, um, and but in a way it's the separation means that it's a story that will stand on its own.
Right.
It doesn't require you to have read the first one.
Okay.
Um,
Well, in 16 year period too, that gives time for a lot of development, historically and s- um, spiritually. I know that time period, and the Neolithic and Bronze Age were your specialties, right?
they were at the end of my career, well, beginning and the end of my career. I trained as a prehistoric archaeologist. Worked on hunter gatherers and early agriculturists in Africa,
Uh-huh.
and then came back to the UK in the mid 80s and worked with whatever archaeology was going. It was the era of commercial archaeology really getting underway.
Right.
And you went to work for somebody and did whatever job you was put in on your desk, basically.
Right.
So I worked in Southampton on medieval stuff, and then gradually it got later and later and later. I was working on sort of 18th century, 17th and 18th century stuff by the mid 90s, and it wasn't until I moved to Wiltshire that I was able to get back and do some excavations with Roman and prehistoric material, uh, and start sort of ambling back to what was got me into archaeology in the first place.
Right.
Um, and then when archaeology wouldn't give me jobs anymore because I was getting too old, um, I wound up working for English Heritage at Stonehenge, and I was there for 7 years.
Okay.
And walked in thinking that I knew everything there was to know about Stonehenge. I'd been teaching it for 4 years, and I knew it all. And I'd taken students there and everything else, and I just got there and realised that I knew absolutely zilch, absolutely nothing. And there were guys there who were not archaeologists who didn't have a qualification to their names, who knew a damn sight more about Stonehenge than I did.
Uh-huh.
And so I started learning all over again. And I was there for 7 years, and I learned a bit.
Okay.
Uh, yeah, and I sort of developed the ideas over the years and thought, this is all very well, but I'm an archaeologist, and I have to be able to prove my ideas if I want to write academic papers. I have to have
Right.
some supporting evidence. And most of the evidence for how I see this whole thing playing out um, just isn't there anymore. It doesn't exist. Uh, and it's the same sort of problem you must have with your sort of paranormal investigations, you know, people just say, well, yeah, that's what someone says. That's what someone says they saw, but where's the evidence? You know?
Right.
um,
Or with the
and
mediumship I
it
do
was
at
a
these
similar
sites.
sort of sorry.
Yeah, in the mediumship I do at a lot of these sites too. I can't prove it unless there's some kind of documentation
Absolutely
someplace.
no way. Yeah,
Right.
and so I was sitting there. I can't write any. I can't put this down as a theory,
Right.
but I could write a damn good story about it. And so I sat down to do that, and then at the same time, there was a whole lot of new stuff had come out about the Amesbury Archer, and I was just thinking, you know, I could weave those two together and get a really good yarn out of the Amesbury Archer and his life at Stonehenge, and that's how it all happened. I just realizing that I couldn't say anything archaeological, I couldn't academic about it,
Right.
but I had these ideas, and they all fitted beautifully, and they came out of academic thinking.
Hmm.
You know, a lot of the ideas I have about shamanism and the shamanic religion and the importance of it in the Neolithic society comes from a guy called David Lewis Williams. And David Lewis Williams was once upon a time was an English teacher who then got bitten by the archaeology bug and did a PhD in archaeology, which is when I met him and knew him. He was working in South Africa, and he came up with this outlandish idea that all rock art of Southern Africa was connected to shamanic experience and shamanic trance and that sort of it's all religious, it's all done by shamans, and um, it's all to do with shamanic trance and healing. Um, and none of us believed him. He said, yes, yes, David, yes, yes, David. And he was a very erudite man and very, very, very intelligent, super intelligent bloke. Um, and he sort of nibbled away from. I think he wrote his book in 1966, or perhaps it was a little bit later. Maybe it was 70 something, early 70s. But by the early 80s, when I knew him, uh, he was still battling to try and get recognition for his ideas in South Africa, and he was also trying at the same time to break through into Europe because he felt that the system worked in Europe as well.
Right.
Um, so I met him and I had the pleasure of working with him um, and hearing his ideas. I don't agree with all of them, and I think very few people do these days. We've moved on from there, but
Right.
it's been a long time since anyone's questioned that he had a stroke of genius and you know he basically saw the way. At least it was all happening in Southern Africa. When it comes to applying it to Europe, uh, there's a lot more sort of opposition and detritus floating in the way. But
Right.
that's the basis of my thinking about it, was that it all comes back to symbolic behavior, um, belief in a spirit world, and spirits that, and I call them spirits as opposed to gods, because I think you
Right.
behave very differently towards spirits than you do to gods. Um, and you have to see something like Stonehenge in the light of that, and you have to see something like the changeover to the Bronze Age in the light of that system of beliefs, because these people, right through, well, people right up until medieval times and beyond, the religious side of their life was totally integrated with the secular side of their life. There was no dichotomy. There was no differentiation. And people back in the Neolithic would have just lived their lives, and every decision they made would have been based as much on the supernatural as it was on the natural.
Right.
And they would never have seen any problem with the two sides. Not like we, where we question everything nowadays. Whether even a lot of um, Orthodox religious people question their own religion before they put a foot forward. Um, people just didn't. It all worked. It all worked seamlessly. So it just carried on.
Yes.
And I think you can't see something like Stonehenge or the influx of people who brought the metal age into this country unless you actually take that on board and you say, what was the connection? There's got to be a religious element to it somewhere.
Well,
And that was what I was starting to do with when I decided to write the story of the Eye of Time, the first book. This one really just takes it all a step further. It's much less tightly connected to the fact base, which was, you know, the things that were found with the Amesbury Archer and his burial, and the things that are known about him from the study of the skeleton. It's much looser than that. It's a character from the first book, taken to take you the next step of the journey towards people beginning to uh, take on this metal age, and how it is that the genetic groups, the DNA just gets replaced by this Bronze Age population when there's no evidence of invasion and no evidence of battles or conflict of any sort. How did it happen? And that's kind of what I'm trying to show here in the second book. That was the reason for that. But it's a lot. It's much freer from being tied down to a fact base. It's a story. It's a novel. It's a complete novel. Whereas the other one was a novel tied into a real character.
Right. And it was a very historical novel because you had the archaeology right as well
Mm.
as the character or what you could discern of the Amesbury Archer as well. And the metaphysics that you put into it, um, I thought were a bit mind blowing actually, um, especially in a couple of places. And I wondered just how how you built those understandings um, of what was there. Now, I've been to Stonehenge a few times. I know what you're talking about from an amateur perspective. I do have a bachelor's in history, but I do not classify myself even an amateur historian. I have far too much respect for the field, um, and the what I do is I have a fascination and a passion, but I'm not the disciplined historian that I'd like to be. Um, but how you how you've put all of these pieces together, and I know that for a while we've had some concept of yes, these people, because we can see it all over. So earlier, people without science, especially, um, have a spiritual element to everything that's going on in life. That's the only way they had to explain anything going on. But how did you put all this into that really fascinating base? And I don't want to say too much about it because I don't want to give away anything in the book. Um, and then have you carried that over, and is that part of the development and how that's changed in the new book?
Yeah, very much. It's a continuation of the same sort of set of uh, religious outlooks. Um, yeah, that's a good question. Sorry, the influence that made that change, and we'll get into that in a little while.
Okay.
Um, just talking about the religion again, I can't stress how much I would owe to David Lewis Williams and his views on this. David, like me, is someone who is, as far as I know, totally devoid of any psychic ability whatsoever. I mean, um, we had a shaman who used to visit us at the Stones, and she once said to me, you know, Tim, you don't have any ability, but don't worry about it. You're never going to go into a trance. You're never going to have a trip. You're never going to see ghosts on the horizon. That's fine. That's who you are. What you are is you anchor all this because you accept it, and you can see it going on, even if you can't see it. Um,
Right.
you know, you act as a sort of anchor. You act as a grounding force. Um, and I never didn't know quite what she meant, but nonetheless, it, uh, it made me feel better about myself. Um, she said, "You're a very, very important part of the crew here. Very important part, because you know you're the rock. You're the foundation, basically." And I thought that's really nice. It's so sweet of you to say that, but it's not true. But never mind. Anyway, my point is that I don't have psychic abilities, and I don't have visions, and the closest I have ever experienced to anything that happens to these people in the books was once, I think, when I went on a field trip, an archaeology field trip, and a friend brought along, being South Africa, grass was quite freely available and cheap, and he'd brought along rather a lot for everyone to participate in, and found that he was the only guy there that actually smoked the stuff at all. Um, and I said, "Well, I'll share it with you if you want. You know, I don't really go for this. I don't sort of go for the loss of control, really. But
Right.
yeah, I'm not doing anything." And we went and we walked along the beach together, about five of us actually, and the two of us shared two huge, great joints. And I it was the only time I've ever had anything approaching a vision, a pleasant vision. I've had complete wind up from grass once or twice, which is why I stopped using it almost as soon as I started. Um, but this on this occasion, it was just beautiful, and there were all these wonderful coloured lights, and everything joined together, and it was just an amazing experience. And I didn't want to go to sleep because when I woke up in the morning, we were sleeping on the beach. Um, I woke up in the morning and it was just cold and damp. I was back to normal. Um, but that was the only time I've ever had anything like a sort of experience of that sort. And I've wound that in. It's that somewhere, that experience is somewhere in the eye of time. Um, but all the all the information I have on the shamanic experience in there is based on either David Lewis Williams's work, um, and through him, or from the ethnographic work on San Bushman shamans, and their healing rituals and their beliefs and their experiences, um, and on a whole bunch of different North American, native North American uh, people, um, and bits that I have read there, and all the things that come through that are common through all of these. You know, I mean, it's a bit hackneyed now, but the idea of the tunnel and the vortex, um, and coming out the other end, the light at the end of the tunnel, and everything, and it is something that is just universal. It's something that uh, all people going into this kind of experience seem to mention, but it's different every time, and that doesn't surprise me in the least.
Right.
Um, and so those sorts of things are all taken out of books. I'm afraid I have never experienced anything like that myself. I wish I had, but you know, and I don't think at my age it's going to change.
Well, you
So
never know. It can. Sometimes as we get a little older, we're more receptive to things that we've had too many guards up about before. And
yeah,
especially when we're building careers and doing all these other things. And having to be a little bit careful of reputations while building a career um, and all that. So you never know.
Mm.
And
I have these guards up, and I have had these guards up since I was very, very young, I think. Um, and yeah, I just am not I don't like being out of control. I don't even like being drunk particularly. Um, Although that tends to be just a sort of a relaxation rather than anything else, and then
mhm,
one gets to the point of just to the point where you're enjoying it, and suddenly you're then feeling ill and you've lost it, you know. So
right.
it never actually gets to the euphoria stage.
And
And I'm not sure
I
that I'd like that. I'm not sure that I'd like that if I got it, quite frankly.
yeah.
You
Well, and
know,
I don't mean with the drugs. I just mean naturally. I honestly I don't like the drugs or the alcohol. I mean, I don't. I love alcohol, but I don't like getting drunk.
mm,
I don't like getting high. And it's funny. I haven't. Marijuana's been legal here um, for several years now, and I haven't partaken in any just out recreational legal marijuana since it's been legal because I don't like it. You know.
yep,
Um,
absolutely.
and
Wouldn't argue.
so I know what you mean. I'm far too much of a control freak on my own self, and
My yeah, my opinion exactly. I think one of the things why we get along actually is that you and I have a lot in common in terms of sort of personality traits. I think,
I
you
think
know,
so too.
when I see your posts on Facebook about music and stuff like that, I think, yeah, I've been there. Yeah, I know that. So I think we certainly have a slightly similar outlook um, on life.
I think so
But
too.
good.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Quite the history.
So the whole religious thing is secondhand, and in fact, this got behind me, that middle shelf up there, is
Uh-huh.
all my books on shamanism and archaeology and shamanism and Stonehenge and shamanism and um, religious ritual centers and ritual sites and things like that in archaeology. Some of them are a bit fringe, and some of them are absolutely straight down the line archaeology,
Hmm.
and some of them are written by shamans about their experiences. And I've tried to read a wide range of things to get something that is as accurate as I can do.
Great.
Now, why shamanism um, goes way back to the beginnings of the Paleolithic and the rock art of the Paleolithic in this part of the world. Um, and there is a small amount of evidence that shows link between shamans and the rock art.
Okay.
There are a few images where there are people who are what we call therianthropes. They are part animal, part human.
Okay.
The most famous one shows a chap wearing he looks like he's wearing a bison skin. He's got the legs dangling down the back,
Hmm.
and he's got these two lines coming out of his face. And he's sort of his back legs are sort of up, and his arms are out in front of him, and he's probably dancing.
Okay.
Um, and he's generally thought to be a shaman or a witch doctor of some sort, generally accepted as that. Now,
Mm.
David Lewis Williams would look at the two lines coming out of his face and say, he's bleeding from the nose. He's going into a trance. And as he's going into a trance, this is not a cloak he's wearing. It's a metaphorically it might be a cloak, but in reality, he is changing into that animal. Um, in his own inside his own brain traveling that he's doing, he is changing into that animal. He is channeling that animal, and he's going to use that animal, the spirit of that animal, to find the answers to the questions that he's seeking with his trance. And essentially, all this shamanic work is all about healing or about prediction. It's one of the two things. So, or both. Um, so the healing can be anything from, you know, my wife's brother-in-law has put a curse on me. Can you find it?
Uh-huh.
Or he's stolen my soul away, which is a very shamanic way of putting a curse on somebody, as far as I can tell. The soul has actually been, someone's lost their soul.
Oh, I
They've
hadn't heard of that one
misplaced it.
before. Okay.
Sorry?
I hadn't heard of that one before. That's interesting.
Yeah, quite. If you read some of the Native American ones, they do quite a lot of um, soul searching. It really is. They're out looking for people's misplaced souls. You can live without your soul, but a chunk of you's missing, and
Right.
you can't operate properly. And so you've got to bring the soul back into the body and into the, so that it's travel, the body and the soul are traveling in the right direction, and all this sort of stuff. It's quite complicated and probably a bit beyond me. But that's the aim, and you can solve a lot of a person's problems by that. Now, generally speaking, that doesn't happen by accident. The
Okay.
soul is influenced, the spirit is influenced by other spirits, and it can be malicious or it can be accidental. And if it's
Okay.
malicious, then you need to find out who's actually set the other spirits onto you. And then you're getting into the realms of African witch doctors and the whole thing that we now talk about with witch doctors the world over, but it comes from an African shamanism, um, where these where people believe that, you know, everything is caused related to spirit activity, and people have manipulated the spirits, or the spirits have manipulated people to uh, cause the curse to be put, and the curse then affects the person. Um, yes, a connection to the soul perhaps is disconnected and connected souls rather than lost souls, maybe a better way of putting it. Um, so that's on the personal scale. Then you can get up to a whole community, and you might have something like an outbreak of disease, or a famine, or a failure of a crop, or something like that. Um, and that is the same thing. It's the spirits have caused it. It doesn't happen by itself. The spirits have caused it. You've got to find out which spirits it is, why they're upset, and and placate them and sort it out. And then next year it'll be fine.
Okay.
And the shaman's main job seems to be to go into the spirit world, talk to the spirits, and find out what it is that's happened, what's gone wrong, and then you take the message back and you say, "This is what's gone wrong. This is what we have to do to fix it." Um, in my book, it's very straightforward. It talks to spirits, and they say, "You've got to do this to fix it."
Right.
Um, as far as I can tell, in real life, in real life shamans, it's never that simple, and it's never that straightforward. Um,
Right.
and this is one of the reasons why we run up against this real problem of evidence. Is that, of course, um, the shaman can sit there and say, "Well, this is what I got. I got this whole symbolic gobbledygook thrown at me, but I think I can understand that it works this way." But a complete charlatan can do exactly the same thing. And
Right.
so people say, "Well, it's all charlatanism, isn't it? It's all charlatans." Um, and this is where the problem lies: is that the whole thing is very difficult to pin down to anything. Anyway, I'm digressing. I'm sorry. Um,
Oh no, it's all
so
fascinating.
this is the kind of situation that these shamans are operating in, and this is what they do. Now, in my books, they're also, I refer to them as seers. Um, they are they're not just uh, spirit healers, but they're also people who can predict the future. And we think that people did that because of the symbolism for seasonality, for um, uh, the, the pointers towards the heavens, the pointers towards the shamanic cosmos, all these things, they work on a cosmic scale. They are looking at when they're at Stonehenge, they are working through the seasonal cycles, and they are using the heavenly bodies and therefore the heavenly spirits. And I don't mean that with the capital letters that we have in Christianity. I'm just talking about the spirits that live up in the heavens and that
Right.
rule the heavens. Those guys are being brought into it, and they are being included um, in the sort of general machinations, the making it all work and making it all happen. That is what happens around a place like Stonehenge. Um, People are not going in there and falling down on their knees and worshipping spirits or gods. I really don't think that is happening at that stage. They are celebrating the seasons, and they are celebrating their relationship with the spirits, and they are including the spirits in with them, so that the spirits know that they are part of the community. And then you go and you say to the spirits, now guys, it's been really nice to you. Can you see your way clear to doing this for us, or letting us know what's wrong? And you negotiate with spirits. You can negotiate with them. You can argue with them. You don't always win, but you can argue with them. Nobody argues with gods. Well, a few people do, but they tend to end up as pillars of salt and things. Um,
Right.
People don't argue with gods. What you do is you get down on your knees and you pray and you hope that the god is actually going to listen to you and do what you ask, or do
And not be
something.
fickle. And the gods are so often in more human form than anything else, including
Indeed.
human emotion. And that makes it an interesting comfort. Um,
But that's the difference to me between gods and spirits. A religion that's based on spirits is one in which the humans still have an element of control and power,
right.
uh, whereas with with gods, the only people that have power or even can claim to have any control are the priests.
Right.
They are professionals. We put our trust into the priesthood, and we hope to God, literally, that they are going to do a good job.
Right.
And you've got to change that very subtly, twist it very slightly, and bring it back to um, when you've got a part-time priesthood, shamans, um, who can then uh, who can then intercede with the spirit world, but they can negotiate, and anybody can do it. In amongst in the sand communities, as many as half the men are are shamans, are healers,
Now, which community is
and
that?
about a third of the women.
Which
Uh,
community?
it's a huge number, a percentage of the population who practice to a degree. I mean, some of them will say, "Yeah, I only do it when it's directly with my family because I'm pretty hopeless outside of my own family,"
Okay.
or they only do it with certain types of curses or only certain types of problems. And others are just accepted, widely accepted as very, very powerful spirit mediums, spirit, uh, what's the word? Dealers, people who deal with the spirits, intermediaries.
Okay.
Um, but it's a very high percentage of the population. Basically, something like dowsing, anybody can do it. 90% of people can do it, but you've just got to have um, you've got to have the bent. You've got to have the mind, the open mind to actually move in that direction to get anywhere.
You've done
Um,
some really interesting work with dowsing.
I have.
Yeah.
Uh, I've done some very basic work with dowsing. and it's many, many years ago. I tried doing some dowsing quite recently, and it was like being back to square one again. I couldn't remember, I wasn't getting anything, uh, and it's yeah, it was a bit upsetting, really. But I think once one has the book and everything cleared out of the way, I think I'm going to hopefully over the winter and into next summer try and do a bit of dowsing up on the mall and see if I can remember how to do it. Because I think it is something that definitely the first few times you do it, it doesn't seem to work, and then it gradually um, starts to it starts to react, and
Okay.
it's reacting through you, but it's not you that's controlling it. It's just your body's saying this is happening around you, and it's reporting back to you through the rods or the hazel wand or whatever it is you're using.
Okay.
Um, and yeah, I don't purport to understand it or understand what used to happen when I did it, but
Mhm.
yeah, I did dowsing for water and mostly for archaeology,
Right.
and that seemed to work 40-50% of the time, maybe 60% when I was feeling lucky. Absolutely hopeless as a method of actually uh, um, searching for archaeology, because it's totally unreliable. but it's too reliable to be completely by chance.
Right.
You know,
And that's the one thing
you
that I've really thought was interesting because I've seen and have heard of dowsing in so many different ways. A lot of people use it for spirit communication,
mm.
um, which I'm always a little skeptical about because it's so easy to move those rods without knowing you're moving them. Um,
And I'm
but
sure I've got a feeling that you are actually moving them, even when
okay,
you're dowsing for water. I think you're doing it, but you're not. I can sit there and I'm trying as hard as I can to to feel whether I'm doing anything, and I'm damn sure I'm not. But I don't
okay.
see how it can happen otherwise, um, unless you sort of believe in sort of energy lines that are flowing through you in such a way that they produce this regular thing. If that was the case, I would expect that if I walked at something from one angle, I'd get a totally different reaction to if I walked at it from another angle. Whereas you don't, you tend to get the same reaction exactly.
Okay.
Um, so I don't know, but I think there's definitely something in the body which is triggering all that stuff, or in the mind which is triggering all
Well, maybe the
that.
mind trick connecting with the objects that you're dowsing for, because you're the first person I'd ever heard of using it for archaeology and having success with it, at least more than the law of averages.
It's more than the law of averages, yeah, and it's as I say, as a method of prospecting for archaeology, it's completely useless, and it's why archaeologists don't use it. I know quite a few archaeologists who accept it and who you know who've used it as a bit of fun, but
Okay.
it's as a prospecting method, it's just too unreliable with the cost of archaeology as it is. You can't afford to throw several grand at a 40% possibility, even though it's more than chance.
Yeah.
It can still be wrong.
Well, that's
So yeah. Anyway, that's dowsing. Uh, Another part of the same sort of thing. That this whole thing about spirits and shamanism um, basically boils down to, as I say, the indications at places like Stonehenge, all over Britain. Um, all these places, you've got all the symbolism and the polarity of symbolisms, oppositions of symbols. Uh, at almost all of these sites, there are these symbols in opposition, and they seem to be sort of stacked in some way or other, so that you get these group clusters of symbols. And this is the thing people say, oh well, you know, if you've got a large upright stone and a cove, then the cove has got to be a womb, and the upright is an erection, and you know, you've got male, female, finish. That's it. No, that's just the beginning of it. These things are layer upon layer upon layer, and it depends what solution you're after, which symbolism comes to the fore.
Okay.
Yeah. So if you're after a problem with a woman can't give birth, then the womb penis type opposition becomes quite an important one to resolve, to get the balance of between the two.
Right.
Whereas if you've got something which is I don't know, someone has a problem, the night is a problem and daytime is fine, then you need to resolve the difference between heaven and the underworld, or the upper worlds and the underworlds, and that's another interpretation of the cove and the upright stone, and you can just go on forever. You know, there's this good, bad, healthy, ill. There's underground, darkness, light, heaven, stars, spirits up in the heavens, spirits of the underworld. All these things are just are all represented by the same two symbols, and you can get this all over the Neolithic monumentality. You get this sort of opposition of symbols, and not always in balance. And one of the other thing about it is that at every single site, it's in a different place. It's in a different organization. And what that tells me is that there's no central organization. This is a religion that doesn't have somebody saying, this is how you do this. They have a set of beliefs. Everybody believes much the same thing. Every little group of people gets together and they decide how they're going to arrange their church, if they call it, you want to call it, their temple. You know, are we going to have a cove? Are we going to have a no is the answer that psychic mediums I've very, very, very rarely used, and never with a great deal of success, as far as I'm aware. Yeah, so these coves. I've lost my place. Sorry.
I'm sorry. I'm trying to put in the questions where I can without interrupting. And
I'm sorry. I'm in full flow.
no, this is fantastic. I love it.
Yeah. So the idea is that you get these oppositions. They're all there, but they're all done differently wherever you go. And that suggests there's no central organization for a religion. There's no organized religion. There is a universal set of beliefs, or almost universal set of beliefs. So I can go 200 miles, 300 miles, talk to the religious people there, and they will know exactly what I'm talking about, and I'll know what they're talking about. But we go about doing it in a different way, because that's their local thing, and they do it the local way. And their temples and their holy sites, their ritual and religious sites will be set up to do it the way that they want to do it, because they organize it for themselves. There's no central authority.
Okay.
The other thing about all these sites is that certainly in Britain, and I know I can get shot down for some of these things, but there's no religious iconography. There is no. There are a few places where there are purportedly sun symbols and moon symbols in carvings on the rocks. They are arguable, although I'm inclined to give the benefit of the doubt on some of them. But they are not arranged in significant places that suggest that they are a focus of the religion.
Okay.
If you go into a Christian church, there's a blooming great cross or a crucifix in the middle of the room with a light, with a window behind it to bash light into your face, and You know, if you miss the idea that that bloke on the cross there is the one that everybody is there to worship, then you've got to be really stupid. You know, you can't miss it. It's such an important focus, and you can go through. You know, you go into a Buddhist temple and there's the Buddha. You go into a Roman temple and there's Zeus or Apollo or whoever it is. You know, there's a 20-foot statue there. You can't miss it. There's nothing like that in any of these Neolithic and Bronze Age sites. Nothing.
And there's nothing that indicates it was there and it's just been lost or vanished.
Nothing that indicates that. I mean, it's possible. It's possible. Maybe they made dirty great leather footballs of the sun, which they hang from the stones, and they you know, who knows? But there is no positive evidence that there was ever any religious iconography of gods. You know, if you look at Egypt, again, the gods are huge. There are people. There's the kings. There's the nobles, and they're all getting bigger and bigger and bigger until you get to the gods. And the gods are big, and the gods are almost always mixtures of animals and humans. They are not human. They are, you know. So you know that you're looking at something that is different. You're looking at a spirit that is kind of extra special, and that iconography is completely missing from Northern Europe at this time. There are a few sun symbols just coming in the Bronze Age, just coming in. And there are possibly a few carvings on the rocks, but they're small and they're not central. So it's these two elements that first of all say we're looking at a shamanic religion with a cosmology, a shamanic cosmology, and the spirits that rule everything and run everything are in there. But we're not looking at a scenario in which people go into a temple to pray in the hope of getting a particular spirit or group of spirits to do what, you know, to fulfill their pleas or to answer their pleas. We're not telling them this is what we want. We're asking them, please do this for us.
Right.
That's an altogether different religion, and that level of and that very rapidly becomes an organized religion, and it becomes one in which you have full-time professional priests.
And that seems to happen as societies become more centralized with larger habitation sites, where you start getting, well, I'm thinking of Mesopotamia, Egypt, you made me think, and such. And looking at, because the ancient history is what I love the most. And I've been able to go to some of the sites in Turkey or Egypt and Britain quite a bit. And just if my memory is putting it all together right, it's as the people become a more unified culture in a larger space and need the rulers or the organizers at a more substantial level, then the religion seems to come in and help support the concept of that hierarchy.
Oh, definitely. The religion is always a supporter of the hierarchy. It's arguably one of the causes of the hierarchy as well. But I don't think I could ever even try to prove that, quite frankly. But yeah, there is a connection. You've got to have a structured, tiered society, which is most common with an urbanized society.
Right.
But and when that happens, you start getting space for full-time priests. And when you've got space for full-time priests, you develop the religion. The priests then kind of take over, and they say, right, they put themselves between the population and the spirits, and they separate the spirits off and say the rest of the population, you can only sit and you can ask, but there's no guarantee that the gods will actually take any notice of you. And that's kind of happening in the Bronze Age. It's happening at the end of the Neolithic in the Near East, and this every decade, as you know, this goes back another 1,000 years. We've got Göbekli Tepe and the other Tepe place that has been
Tepe,
found.
or what? My
Yeah,
my Turkish is pretty bad, so I butcher those words, but yeah,
yeah, they're now 2 or 3,000 years earlier than anything else that we've come across.
right.
But again, we're looking at the you don't you look in those sites, and there's no sort of central stone with a huge great carving of a god on it.
No,
These are sites which are still community projects. They're very, very different to what's going on in Northern Europe, but they're still, you can still argue that we're looking at an essentially a spirit-based religion, and not yet one where the gods have taken over and the priests have taken over, and they are they intercede. But it may have happened. It may have happened. I don't think we understand these Turkish sites all that well as yet.
yeah,
I certainly
I
don't.
think you're right. I don't think we do yet either, and
Got a
it
long way to
takes a
go.
certain amount of community wealth to have. You've got to have enough extra food that not everybody has to be involved in procuring food, to have a class of people that are full time doing something
Yeah,
else.
and it does look as if that sort of thing is happening with the Turkish hunter gatherers or proto agriculturalists or whatever they were. You
Right.
know, I mean, that's a massive community undertaking, and just the organisation of it suggests that at least somebody was sitting down with a drawing board and planning the whole thing out. And that takes, it's the planning that takes the months.
Right.
You can do all this. You can haul those big stones around. You can carve all the big stones, but you've got to organise the labour force,
Hmm.
and somebody has ultimately got to say, we need to do it this way. They did it. Had to do it at Stonehenge. They had to do it at a lot of the big megalithic sites. There may have been. I've argued elsewhere that these are temporary leaders and not necessarily full-time chapters, or at least they don't have to be. I think they probably were, but they don't have to be. Um, and you could argue the same thing for Göbekli Tepe and all the rest. But it might be more than that. It might be something that is a germ that is starting there, which is what leads to all the Mesopotamian civilizations and Egypt and the rest of it. And that's maybe why it kicks off there rather than anywhere else. You know, um,
Right.
there was a
Well,
question earlier on. Someone was asking whether there were shamans on archaeological teams.
right.
To the best of my knowledge, no. um, there is. I have never come across an archaeological team on this side of the Atlantic, anyway, um, where a shaman is actually employed as a shaman on an archaeological site. Excuse me. It's what's left of the flu. Um, but that doesn't mean to say that we don't listen to them sometimes. And it doesn't mean to say that I don't know of any archaeologists that actually consult shamans as a part of either finding archaeological sites or understanding them. But you know, I think it could happen, and there are people out there who do communicate with the archaeological community, and some of them are listened to. Some of them make sense. Um,
Good.
I've always thought that some of them made sense to me. Uh, so yes, we use or I'm prepared to use shamans, and other archaeologists are open-minded about it. And we use what's written about shamanism and the idea of shamanism. And because that's becoming a much more popular view of prehistoric religion, I think you're going to find that that is a trend which is just going to continue, and that more and more um, archaeologists will consider shamanic points of view. And I mean, I'm talking about live, living shamans,
Right.
and their points of view when dealing with archaeological religious phenomena.
Okay.
Um, but well, it's not going to happen to me because um, my days of running large scale, large excavations or large projects are long gone, if ever they existed. Um, my archaeology nowadays is much more small scale and prosaic and local history orientated.
Uh-huh.
Um, so yeah, no, we don't. Archaeologists don't employ shamans as such, although there may be shamans on the payroll, but they're not employed as shamans. They're employed as archaeologists, um, and they either are qualified or they have the experience to do the job as an archaeologist.
Okay.
Uh,
That makes
yeah,
sense. And I find here I have a problem with some of the concepts with the shamans and such. We have so many people that take a class for a year that call themselves a shaman, or uh, they read a few books and they're a shaman. And we've my understanding is that it's a lifelong training, and people usually start quite young and mentor and learn and train, and it's I have a lot of respect for the idea and the true ones, but I would imagine it's hard to find, at least in Western society, authentic shamans.
yes, I think so, and it's even harder, I think, to tell once you
Yes,
find them, are they authentic or not?
right.
Um, and yeah, I mean, I've met a few who claim to be shamans, and I have always been. Uh, I want to say I'm saying polite, but that's not what I want. Respectful of them, but I have no way of telling uh, whether how much of their what they saw was what they wanted to think, or whether they were actually seeing
Right.
something real, or yeah, was it real or imagined, and does it matter? That's another thing you have to think about. We're sort of looking, saying we can't prove it. Must be fake. We can't prove it. Um, but the imagination can be real, and
It
that's what
can.
shamans try and tell you all the time. Um, and at that point, is anybody a charlatan? Is anybody a fake? Or do they all have their own little angle on reality? Even someone who is quite consciously trying to deceive, they're still manipulating reality. They are still altering things.
That's
Um,
a good point.
whether they do it, whatever they're doing it for, or whether they're doing it from some gift, or whether they're doing it just because they've read the books like I have, and they're going through the motions. um, they're still doing it,
Hmm.
and isn't that a valid form of shamanic action?
That's
Then
a
now
good
you're getting
question.
into
That's a really good question, and I hadn't thought about that one before.
neither had I until now. Actually, I literally thought of it while I was talking. Uh,
Uh-huh.
mm,
Well,
odd.
it's fascinating all the different places all of these can lead. One of the questions I've had, because even back when I was in undergrad, a lot of what we were taught was that, from an anthropological standpoint, uh, looking at hunter-gatherer tribes, looking at that we have today in the world, looking at shamans from these types of tribes that we had today. Um, and then that is used as an idea of how things would have worked 5, 6,000 years ago. But I'm also wondering if there's more. How accurate a translation is that really? Because even if you have a fairly isolated tribe, they've been exposed to some things that these other people wouldn't have, just because they don't exist. I mean, the tribe out in the middle of the Amazon has probably seen some weird silver thing flying overhead that makes a lot of noise.
Mm.
Um, the Bronze Age shaman probably hadn't. Um, and
We hope so. We hope not, at least.
That's right. Exactly. And so, and I just got a slight digression there about all the people that think that it was aliens that made everything possible and built everything. So I was about to redline, but I don't know. I don't know how good of a fit it is.
You mean
To
modern?
take the modern
Yes.
tribe and put
Yeah.
it back.
It's an extrapolation at the best, because if you look at particularly, well, South American shamans in the tribes, as you were saying, the Amazon tribes and things like that, a lot of them will turn around and say, we have gods. We have a creator spirit. We have a primary spirit. You know, these are our gods. Um, and if you go to Africa, to an African witch doctor, they will talk about gods as well as spirits. And all over the world, people, these essentially shamanic religions have gods. That doesn't mean that they always have them,
Right.
but
They've had
all
they've
of
had
them.
millennia to develop their idea that the other people didn't have.
Absolutely. And the other thing that they've all had is contact at some point with people with organized religions who do have gods.
That's a good point.
And you know, it's the Romans used to come into a new place and they'd say, "Oh, that's your god of corn and harvest. We've got a god of corn and harvest. We call him blah." And therefore, and you start getting these dual names for gods in foreign parts in the Roman Empire. And it's because they recognize that, you know, a particular foreign god or spirit is the same as their god.
Right.
Um, and that automatically means that whatever the people who lived there locally, however they classified that particular spirit or god, they bloody well now have to accept the Roman version of it, that is a much more important one. So, you know, when Christian missionaries go out into the jungle and turn around and say, no, you've got this very special God, and you say he actually brought the people into existence. Oh, he's a creator God. He's God. He's the same person. Never mind, he's a woman in your case. He's God. He's a person. He's and thereafter, when the shamans are dealing with Christian people, it makes obvious sense that what they're going to turn around and say is, well, this God, your God, same as ours, so and so, is doing this or isn't doing this or whatever. And within a few generations, they're not going to be able to tell that apart. They're going to be, that will be the way that it's always been, because you don't have anything written down. It's all passed by word of mouth, and that means that history is all in the present,
Right.
to a large degree. And again, I'm opening myself up to be shot down in flames. Anybody?
No,
You know,
I mean what you say makes perfect sense to me. Here are a couple things. I'm thinking, Sharon, you
Shaman.
mean shaman instead of yeah.
Either that or he's being silly.
Yeah, and I don't know that sounds like it might be one of the canyons. We have some.
That's Chaco Canyon, isn't it? CHACO, Chaco Canyon,
Probably.
one of the Pueblo sites.
Yeah, and those are fascinating too. Haven't been down there for forever.
I don't know if that's an assessment of our conversation.
Right.
Now we get the point, Linda.
Yeah.
It will happen sometimes, and yeah, it's not so much understanding. It's a question of acceptance of norms, and the norms have changed. What William was saying earlier was that, what happened 4,000, 3,000 years ago cannot be the same as what the same person, if they were translated into a modern idiom, a modern situation, they would not see the world in the same way, because there's the 4,000 years of history and changing beliefs and changing experience that have gone between. And what you write down today cannot possibly be the truth of a situation 4,000 years ago. But you can go back. There are rules about extrapolating backwards. Ethnographic analogy. The anthropology has very strict rules about how you apply ethnographic analogy. It's a shame that not all archaeologists apply them, because they are where a way in which you can evaluate your own assumptions, and you can look at these things and say, I think this is the same ethnographic situation as that, and then you're talking about something which is happening on the other side of the world. If I can draw a Stonehenge example, whenever it was 20 years ago nearly, when Mike Parker Pearson came up with the idea of Stonehenge was a place for the ancestors, and Woodhenge and Durrington Walls were places for the living.
Right.
And you had this landscape of the dead and the landscape of the living, the landscape of the ancestors. And it all came from this idea that was in Madagascar. They built stone monuments and stone effigies and things like that up for the ancestors to symbolize the ancestors. But if they wanted to talk about the real life now and deal with spirits that are around now, that are not specifically ancestor spirits, or to do with celebration of seasons or the living, they use timber, they use wood. Wood is living, wood is alive, and therefore you use it for things which are living and alive. Stone is eternal and is not alive, and is therefore the equivalent symbolism for the ancestors. And he took that piece of ethnography, and said, plonk, here it is, it works in Stonehenge. Epiphany moment, look at this, it all works. And it just goes against all the rules. First of all, it's from a completely unrelated culture on the opposite side of the world.
Right.
Secondly, the problem that you brought up was that it's a modern day analogy. It's what people believe and have believed over the last couple of hundred years, since well, maybe 500 years since Europeans have been involved in Madagascar at all, and something which is 3,000 BC, 5,000 years old.
Right.
You're right at the extreme limits. The societies are different. The social organization is different. The background, the history is different, and the place on the world is different. None of those things suggest any continuity between the two.
Right.
Having said that, Mike Parker Pearson is a lucky so-and-so. He does seem to make these wild stabs in the dark that end up holding more than a grain of truth. And he does seem to be able, he has insight, I think. I'll give him that. And I don't agree with everything he says, and I don't agree with everything he believes, but he is able to look at these things laterally and just say, make that jump and say, wow, this is like, and the difference is that where I would say this could be like that, he says this is it, which is why he's a professor of archaeology with with a huge research budget, and and I'm a retired guy with 2 pennies to rub together if I'm lucky, because he knows how to sell his project, and he knows what he's got to do in order to make people support him and bully for him. That's great. But that particular one was something that I just couldn't believe he got any mileage out of at all, because it just broke all the rules for ethnographic analogy, and most archaeologists would just throw it out.
Right.
Um,
And I knew about that theory, but I had no idea that he picked that up from Madagascar and what's going on over there right now. Um, I know about him mostly from Time Team, and
yeah,
it's an hour-long show, a little less, and so I understand there are lots of things that I scratch my head because how did they get from here to here? I don't see a connection. Um, but maybe they didn't put it in the show. But something like you just said, I mean, to me, that would make, if I'd understood that's where he got that, I wouldn't have found it very credible without a lot of extra support. Um, just because,
and yeah, I think that's how he how he gets away with it, and why some people are so adamant that he's an absolute swine, and he's wrong, and he's completely wrong, and he's just lying all the time. Um, it's not that he just knows how to work the system,
uh-huh,
and he's working the system, and making a living out of it, and doing very well, and he's nobody's fool. He's a very bright man, and from what I've seen of his archaeology, and I've only actually seen him dig it for about half an hour, I think, on one occasion. But I've seen some of his digs. I've been on a couple of the sites around Stonehenge when he was doing the Riverside project, and there's nothing wrong with his archaeology,
okay, good.
um, and there's nothing wrong with, on the whole, with the observations he makes and the assumptions he makes on the ground. It's just some of the places some of the things he does with the theory that opens him up to this sort of love-hate relationship that he has with some of the population, and he handles it fine, and that's okay. And I wish the man all the luck in the world. But and he's certainly opened up the playing field with, as far as Stonehenge is concerned. Brought a whole new range of ideas in, people had to think about, and they may not. Rather like David Lewis Williams and his ideas, it may be that in 20 years or 30 years' time, people only accept 5% or 10% of what Parker Pearson is saying or proposed. They don't accept that more than 5% of what he said was actually accurate in with hindsight. But that's with hindsight. The point is that we wouldn't have got to that point if we hadn't tested his ideas,
Exactly.
and had to fight against a person who said, "No, this is the way it works." look at all this evidence I can pile and throw at you, and you know, you've got to be able to, you've got to be out of the firing line to some extent to be able to say, hang on a second, you're throwing that stuff, that shouldn't go, you know, that shouldn't go, and then you realize what he's actually doing, and but it takes the sort of the group that is organized, is no, not organized, the group that is involved in that aspect of research. It's going to take them a long while to sort through all the dross. By which stage he's moved on to something else, um, and, uh, and he keeps his career moving that way. Um, but the point is that if he didn't stir up the dust, and he didn't make us all um, jump and say, no, 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 you can't do that, you're wrong. Now I've got to prove you wrong. And if we didn't do that, we wouldn't be advancing at the phenomenal rate that Neolithic and Bronze Age studies have gone over the last 30 years, you know, and between people like him and say again.
Oh, didn't mean to interrupt. I just saying, it's fascinated me how much we've learned. It's been astonishing, actually, in the last few decades. And I mean, sites that we didn't even know existed until a few years ago. I mean, they've found another site, I think, in Turkey since the last time I've been there, and I was just there in 21.
Yeah,
And our understanding of what we'd already seen keeps changing and advancing. And I love it. That's part of what I love about history is we it's not it's not static in
yeah,
that
it's
we
not.
keep getting a better grasp of it. And I love it. It's like you can embrace it and become more a part of it and meld into it that way. It's it's less of a stone written about on paper and more of a real living, breathing experience.
Yeah, it is a problem that more and more when you look on the internet and on social media and that there is an expectation that or a very false expectation.
Yeah.
Good night, Linda.
Yes. Good night,
Yeah,
Linda.
there is an expectation that science has come up with this set of rules and set of answers, and they're not prepared to move from that at all. And everybody stands up and shoots them down about this or shoots them down about that, and they just don't seem to realise that, you know. And archaeologists or scientists, they're never archaeologists. They're always just scientists in general. Are still say this and that and the other thing, and I look at it and I get very hot under the collar, and I say, no, archaeologists are the people you're looking at, and they haven't thought that for decades. There was just one the other day that someone came up with, and I can't remember what it was, but it was something about early early hominids, Neanderthals, and people like that who were somehow, you know, inferior, and archaeologists still think that they can't do this and they can't do that. And I thought, hang on, I studied archaeology in the 1970s, and nobody was saying that then.
No.
This is not archaeologists still think this. They haven't thought it since the 60s, since
Right.
people like Lou Binford turned the archaeological world on its head, and started making us look at all these so-called truths with capital T, and start supporting them with evidence, and putting the ideas out there in ways that can be tested and refuted. and this sort of body of working on proof, and then it became archaeology became, if not in reality, but it's certainly in methodology, scientific.
Right.
And when it became scientific, it started to flow. And in the same as all other science, these ideas are changing all the time. Every piece of new information we get is not just rejected outright by science. It's, generally speaking, someone is looking for a way to meld it onto the block, and see if we can, or do we have to break a chunk off the block and throw that away in order to fit this in and reshape that bit? And when it comes to origins of the universe and things like that, they're doing this all the time. And
Right.
people who sort of jump onto the bandwagon on Facebook and places like that and say, "Oh no, scientists don't think this." Scientists maybe didn't think that 40 years ago, but you really ought to make sure that your information is up to date, because generally speaking, there are scientists out there tearing their hair out now saying, "Of course we don't. Good God, we haven't done that for decades."
Yeah.
Um, anyway, sorry, personal rant.
No, I love it, and it's right along. It just fits so much with my own thinking on so much of this too. I get very frustrated. That's my problem, I guess. But I want to educate people and teach them to wake up and open their minds and use some critical thinking skills. But um, uh, anyway, um, no, this is fascinating, and I could talk all day about this. How are you holding up? I know it's 11:21 your time.
I'm okay. I'm okay for you. Good for a little while longer. I was wondering whether you had any specific questions that had come through to you, because the only person I've actually seen anything was the Linda lady, and the one who made the comments about Choco Canyon. Um,
Right.
those are the only two people I have actually come up on my screen. I don't know if you've had questions through from anybody else that you want
No,
to address.
I haven't had from anybody else. I haven't put up everything that has come through. They're in the comments section so people can read them. Um, but here's some of that. Um, and a lot of it is comments. Okay, here's Charles has got another one. Okay, here's a new one.
Appreciate the American native pass. Uh, I'm not absolutely sure, but I I tend to agree. I think they had or have still a wonderful, clear vision of how the spirit world relates to the the human world, the plane of existence that we're on,
Hmm.
um, and it still holds together in a way that it did before Europeans came in and tried to subvert it in their own ways, knowledgeable or sorry, deliberately or otherwise. Yes, so I have a great deal of admiration for the native North Americans and their beliefs and the way they fuse those beliefs into a cosmology, more than a cosmology, just a way of acting within the world.
Hmm.
Um, and it's been, well, to some extent, the stuff that I've read about um, North Americans, particularly Plains Indians, has been uh, used as a model for a lot of the stuff that I've put in my two books. Um,
Okay.
those sorts of attitudes and the cosmology, the whole idea of a series of different layers of levels of people, of spirits, with us being on this little disc in the middle, um, with the heavens the various spirit levels above us and the various spirit levels of the below us in the underground, and we sort of share this middle bit with the ones that haven't decided to go up or down,
Okay.
and it's an almost universal belief originally, but it has it as we were talking about the changes that occur over the thousands of years, um, it has become varied in different places. But curiously enough, I was looking at some of my school lectures, not when I was teaching, not when I was at school.
Right.
Sorry.
I said right. I was
Oh,
agreeing with what
okay.
you said.
I thought you said when.
Oh,
It was it was in fact about 14, 15 years ago. Um, yeah, I was looking at some of these, and I saw some. I was looking for images of shamanic cosmologies,
mhm,
and I found that the one I'd been using most of all was an ancient Israelite cosmology, a Judaic cosmology of the world. But it works. It's exactly the same. It's just that is a cosmology, an Old Testament cosmology, and it's come directly out of um, the shamanic tradition that goes way back beyond before the beginnings of agriculture. The cosmology doesn't change, and it really doesn't become that different until you get into almost into medieval Christianity, and then you start getting the discarding of this sort of little snow globe
mhm,
that the shamanic religions seem to accept. With in the center is this, as I say, this layer of existence that we share with the spirit world, the living creatures, all the living creatures and all the living plants and everything else share with the the spirits of ancestors and the spirits of the surface of the earth itself. And then there are the layers, anything up to 7 or 8 layers upwards, and there's always a mirror image. It's got to be a mirror image. It's got to be a balance uh,
oh, right.
underneath.
So above
So
as below,
as above, so below. So you might
which
have
is
just
very
one layer above.
very biblical as well.
Very, yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, that whole cosmology grows out of this same thing that created Stonehenge and created um, Göbekli Tepe and all the earlier um, uh, temples or religious structures. Um, the basic worldview is very similar. And what I said right at the beginning was, of course, the big difference is that because there's no um, central organization. I'm sorry, central organization. Then there is no uniformity across it. So what happens here and what happens 100 miles away and 200 miles away and 1,000 miles away, they are bound to be different,
Right.
and they are going to look like different religions because they are, because the people who actually operate those religions are only local.
Right.
Um, but everybody would still recognize that it was still a form of religion. It's still the same basic set of beliefs,
Mhm.
and it still conforms to the same cosmology, um, although they'd each draw it slightly differently. And some would have a tree holding up the heavens, and some would have a mountain holding up the heavens, and some of them would have
Right.
pillars of Hercules on either side holding up the heavens, and underground seas and rock formations underneath, and
And the whole
or in
dome and all.
Stonehenge, chalk as far as as far as the human can dig.
Hmm.
Um, it's they're all variants on the same basic idea that we're in the middle somewhere, and we
Right.
have a very limited viewpoint, and the world, the cosmos operates as a result of all these different parts of the machine operating at their own levels. And we're only on one little bit of it, and it's not surprising that we can't see everything, and that we have to go to the spirit world in order to understand what we need to understand in order to get by. So I completely forgot where I was going.
No, it's fascinating, and I'm glad. And it raises up, actually, and brings up one of the questions I've had a few times, if I can remember now exactly where I was going with. Oh, um, when you get so much of the similarity in different places, in different times, or even at the same time, um, how much of it is the fact that people moved around a lot? I mean, even in the Mesolithic, people were traveling. They had boats and they were moving around, um, and by the Neolithic, especially, I know there was so much movement, and we Europe was Neolithic, and Mesopotamia and the Near East was already into Copper and Bronze Age, and so you're getting minerals, tin from Cornwall and such at different times, if I have it correct. But how much are similarities because of interaction, and how much of it is because basically everybody is looking for a way of explaining the same phenomena of living, and everybody at the time is coming from similar lack of technology and scientific understanding. And so it's only natural that you're going to have these kind of combinations usually popping up because um, that's the reasonable thing that most people are going to come up with at the time. Does that make sense?
And the answer is we don't know.
Okay.
We don't know the answer to that. There's again, you can polarize this, and you can say the two things are: if there wasn't a single explanation that came out way back in prehistory, and has developed into all these different ideas, there wouldn't be the similar thread that goes all the way through, because people don't think like that. People think they have different ideas, and people would come up with completely off the wall all ideas which would have as much chance as anything else of working, you know. So there would be an established major world religion which saw aliens as being the gods, you know.
Okay.
And it wouldn't just be a fringe thing; it would be something that was quite substantial. There'd be another one which saw the gods as being an earlier civilization, um, and and uh, and sort of they taught everybody these things, whether it's the same religion or not. You get all these sort of things that we consider to be slightly off the wall. Sorry, guys, but we do. Um, that these things, if it was just an open shop and everybody could come up with ideas, and over the millennia they had come up with these ideas. People's brains over the last 30,000 years haven't changed that much. They were just as capable back in the hunter-gatherer days of coming up with the ideas of something that is completely outside of their knowledge, aliens, as we are today. We just have a slightly different definition of them. And we'd have those beliefs as established religions, I'm quite sure. So if you take that premise that the ideas can come from anywhere, then the indication is that all our major religions can go back to this basically this shamanic cosmology and this shamanic model, and that is the oldest original set of ideas that people sat down and thought, what the hell is going on in this world? How does it all work? And they came up with these ideas when the population of humans was quite small,
Okay.
and that the ideas haven't changed all that much ever since,
Yeah.
because the ones that they came up with worked, and they just get adapted to suit the same problems, and until we get to a point where we've got an Iron Age situation, and an urbanized situation, urbanized society, or complex societies, or stratified societies, and we've created the adaptations to those. And we're not that far from those things now.
Right.
Um, that's the way I would see it. But there's no reason to when we look at other aspects of archaeology, we do accept that there's independent invention. That agriculture was invented more than once,
Right.
and that pottery was invented more than one place at different times,
Mm-hmm.
and various aspects of religion seem to have been reinvented. Uh, you know, because it makes sense that if you have a corn-based agriculture system and you want somebody to look after that aspect of your life, then you're going to put a god or a spirit in charge of corn. So everybody has corn gods.
Right.
Those are things that can happen from all sorts of different sources, and so those are independent inventions which end up looking very similar. Um, and either of these two models might work. Um, and I certainly don't have a clue um, which one the proof will eventually, and I'm sure the proof will eventually come, will eventually show is the correct one. Did were these religions? Is there a limited bunch of options, and people just keep reinventing new religions which are very similar to old ones, and worldviews which are very similar to old ones, or is it that in fact they all stem from a very 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 old, very early worldview, and they are neatly for a shamanic view. They are polarized, and they're completely the opposite. They come from totally different directions,
But I think
and
they
it may
can
be that
both
they're
work
both true.
together too.
It may be that they're both true, um,
Yeah.
and that they're just levels of symbols of the same symbols are appearing again and again, different to fulfill similar functions.
Mm-hmm.
Who knows?
It's just it's all interesting to me, and um, I mean, w- we look at things, some of the theology, and you mentioned the major religions, and so there's the major monotheistic ones that we have now, which are all basically based on the old Hebrew
Mm,
texts, the God of Abraham. And when you read a lot of the Old Testament, the creation stories, you find similarities to Gilgamesh and some of the earlier, even Mesopotamian stories, and the the creation stories in the Bible talk about, the dome of the heavens and the waters of the sky and the waters of earth. And you look at the Mesopotamian, and the sky is held back by a dome, and the stars are
yep.
floating. And when it rains, it's because somebody opened a window, in the dome of. And there's so much similarity, and the flood stories. I mean, all of these things,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
um, and in that region, it would have been pretty easy for people to move around. But just the sharing, it's interesting to me, and it also puts the concept of religion into a little bit more of a academic exercise that's um, more about created than it is about divinely inspired. But that's me. I don't
Mm.
expect anybody else to do that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a hugely religious person anyway, despite what I've been saying. But I'm not, and I see this very much as a mechanism that has developed over the centuries. Um, that doesn't mean to say that God doesn't exist, and that doesn't mean to say that some of it or a lot of it um, doesn't have a grain of truth in it.
Right.
Um, but we each have to eventually take our own choice and our own decision and put our feet down and make a stand and um, mine is not in any form of organized religion um, or monotheistic or polytheistic religious view. It's more humanist. I think always used to refer to myself as being a an atheist with pagan leanings, pagan sympathies or pagan leanings, um,
Right.
because I much prefer the older simplistic attitudes to religion and this as I was saying earlier about the Native North Americans, that view that just seems so pure is the wrong word, but it's clean. It kind of works because it keeps it all simple and keeps it all basic. Uh,
Right.
and I'm much more sympathetic towards that sort of religious belief than I am towards with organized and extremely hierarchical priesthoods um,
Right.
who also try and run the politics of the world. Uh, I don't have a lot of time for those.
I
So
don't either. I've given up a lot of shoe leather fighting it actually. Um, so yeah, we're pretty much on the same page with all
yeah,
that, I think too. But it's interesting how pieces work sometimes, and I know one of the theories I've read lately, and makes sense, is that you had to create or have some sort of a unifying force to get people into larger groups, living groups, where you were bringing people from outside the same basic family structure
mhm,
and creating a larger unit where you had diverse people. There had to be something that gave the unity to the rules about how they live together and a common cause to coming together. And religion, an organized religion, was necessary, some have said, for that
yeah,
to happen. I don't know about necessary, but it's useful. And I don't know if that they just didn't evolve together. One of the things I've heard just recently about Catholicism is that it was actually, as Rome was getting less able to take care of people's needs and running out of money for bread and circus,
mm,
um, the Christian church had gotten to a point already where so much of the charity work was being done that they needed a larger structure and hierarchy to run the business of getting the goods and services to all the people where they needed them and how they needed them. And again, that's something I just heard. It was watching a history documentary. I have no idea if there's any validity to that, but it made me think.
Yeah.
And
I think if you're talking about Rome, though, there was a huge structure and hierarchy in amongst the old pagan religion. Oh no,
true.
talking about pagan religion in Roman sense, it does mean it takes you back to the proper definition of paganism,
Right.
um, well, what the country people believe. Uh, but the polytheistic uh, religion of Rome, the pre-Christian religion of Rome, that was highly organized.
Yes.
Um, it had uh, there, were- there, were- there were politicians on the top, and then priesthoods were a political role that
Hmm.
you took on, um, and some people were career priests and priestesses, and some people were uh, political appointees,
Hmm.
and they would uh, do the job for 5 years or 10 years or whatever, and then step back having done their civic duty.
Right.
And that's highly organized as part of a organized hierarchical society. So that existed before Catholicism.
Right.
But what it was happening, I guess, and I don't really, it's not something I've studied, but what was happening is that Catholicism or Christianity was exploding as a new religion. It was growing at quite a fearsome rate,
Right.
um, and it probably started out as a very uh, parochially organized religion because it was only a small community, you know. But once it starts to become dominant, then yeah, they probably had to organize themselves pretty quickly and set up a structure that would just be able to run a church of the size that it was becoming.
Yeah.
So I think there's a truth in that. Um, whether it's whether it's a world truth, whether this is true of all religions, or whether it's just the circumstances that were there um, at the time pertain to early Christianity, I don't know.
Right.
Um,
And I don't really either. And this wasn't talking about replacing the pagan structure or anything that was already there. It wasn't claiming to be first. It was just an explanation of why. I think it was third century. Um, the Catholic Church started having a more of a hierarchical piece to it, and I'd always
mm,
thought it was basically because it was just expanding so much. But
yeah,
I
I
hadn't
think
heard
it must
about
be. It's the
the
rate of
charity
expansion.
aspect of it was something new, and it made me think. That's all. And again,
Mm,
this was I don't know the historians on that show well enough to know how much to believe any of it. But I think it was public broadcasting or BBC, which are usually pretty good.
usually, yeah,
Yeah, not
yeah.
always. I try to be pretty discerning in what I watch, but in what I read.
It is difficult. You think you're doing so well, and then you always slip up. Someone says, you know, have you fact checked that last thing you just supported? You know, because it's basically rubbish. You think,
Yeah.
no, I didn't. I forgot. Got carried away on the emotion.
I tell you, I
It,
miss going to the library with the cart catalog and pulling out books and magazine and microfiche. It was a lot easier to verify the quality and reliability of the sources and knowing just who and what you had than trying to do it
yeah,
all online. Um, I know I'm dating myself, but um, it's it's a little overwhelming with. all that keeps coming at us.
It is, and so much of it is just badly researched or badly provenanced, and
Or
you've got
deliberate
to
lies.
become so careful about it now. Sorry,
Yeah,
deliberately.
or deliberate lies meant to
Yeah.
mislead.
Oh yeah. Also in the last couple of years, isn't it?
Oh yeah.
Um,
Cells.
with wonderful AI and all the rubbish that's coming out of that
Uh-huh.
at the moment.
Yeah, I'm concerned. Now, I'm going to make a quick change here of subject, because I want to make sure we get this in. Charles asked where I can get your book, and I want to make sure that we have links to where or how people can buy your books, how people
Right.
can log on to um your your writings, um things like that. Um, because
Okay. Well, the the blog site is the Eye of Tim, um, and it's
the
a
eye on Tim.
Eye of Tim.
Oh.
So it's like the Eye of Time, but with the E knocked off.
Hmm.
Um, so it's my view, in other words, uh, and that's a Google uh, blog post, a Google Blogger site. Um, I can send you through these things, but basically, if you look up the Eye of Tim, or um, it's Eye of Tim, all one word, .blogspot.
Dot
That will
IofTim.com. Is that what you said?
.blogspot.
Oh,
It's not .com. Um,
okay.
I think that's right. Just check it up. It is actually in here in both the books. Yeah, https double slash ioftim.blogspot.com.
Okay.
Okay.
Oops. And I think I have that. What did I just do? Are we there?
Sorry.
Oh, I just did something, and it looked like I messed. It looked like I made everything freeze. Let me see. Okay. Does this look right?
That looks right. Yeah.
Okay. And then how do people get the books?
Right. The book links. The new one is https colon double slash. Now this apparently works internationally. It'll find you your nearest Amazon dealer. mybook.to
My book.
mybook.to, and that's all lowercase
Uh-huh.
slash HOTW. That's Heart of the World, HOTW.
H
And that
O
will
T
automatically
W.
link into and get you the Amazon page in whether it's Amazon.com or Amazon Australia or um, Amazon.co.uk. It will take you to the nearest site.
Okay. And
Okay,
let me see. And that's for the new book.
that's for the new book. The Eye of Time one, the first book, is exactly the same. It's https colon double slash mybook.to slash, and then it's the Eye of Time, all lowercase, no spaces.
Okay, just a second.
Theeyeof TIME, all one word.
Okay, so let me see. So it's, I'm sorry, I was having trouble with something else.
No, that's
My book.
yeah. So my book is a website that does this and creates these links for people
Okay,
to
so
use.
mybook.to
TO, yeah,
slash.
slash the eye of time, all one word.
Oops, come on. Okay, so the I, and anything after that.
Nope, that's it. It just comes
Okay.
to an end.
And everyone, I haven't read the new one yet. I'm looking forward to getting it. Um, that's the first one. The first one was incredible. One of the best books I've read in a very long time. And give yourself time to read it. It's big, but there's a lot to think about and chew through. And I would put it down for little periods because I could tell, wait a minute, I'm going to need some time when I read this next part to really think about it and absorb it. And I can't speed read it, and I don't want to. And I can't break it up. I can't, read part of the piece. I need to go through the whole continuation and not break it up and put it down for a little bit and then pick it up in the middle of this section. Or there were a couple of times when I thought, oh no, something's bad's going to happen to somebody I like. I'm not ready for that right now. so,
Yeah, there's a lot of that in the first book.
yeah.
Um,
Although a lot of times it worked out better than I thought. Um, but because you really get into the characters. I mean, there you had characters in that first one that I became friends with reading that book. I mean, they become part of you in a sense, and that doesn't happen easily. So, so just I'm just telling people, give yourselves a little time. Don't be frustrated if you read it slowly because you enjoy it. You'll get more out of it. Yeah.
Good night, Charles.
Yes. Good night. Um,
Yeah,
this has been
the
fascinating.
the second book is, I think, is almost as long as the first book. It's
Okay.
got fewer pages, but as we've discovered, just receiving the things together, the new book is a smaller format. It was purely and simply we decided to go for that particular format.
Uh-huh.
Quite convinced that that was the format that we'd used before. Both Catherine and myself were totally convinced that that was the format we'd used before. And it wasn't until the copies arrived here on the doorstep that we suddenly thought, oh, we've actually chosen we've chosen the old Picador format rather than the other paper, the earlier paperback format, sort of corgi-sized paperback. So yeah, it's a slightly bigger format, and it's therefore a thinner book. But I suspect there's actually not a great deal of difference in the length of the story. But the second book is definitely less complicated and takes
Okay.
place over a couple of years rather than the 13 or so years of the first book.
Right.
So it's a lot easier to read and to sit down and read it at a sitting, as it were.
Okay.
I know one of the people I used to work with um, who said, about 2 days, 3 days after it had come out, she bought it on the first day, and she said, "I'm already 77% through." I thought it's only been out for 3 days. That's 240 pages you've read. Um,
I bet this is
I
somebody I
guess she
know.
enjoyed it.
Yeah.
I hope she did.
Yeah.
Um,
I'm sure.
but yeah, most of us don't read at that kind of phenomenal rate.
No.
And yeah, enjoy it. Take it slow. Talking of which, you wanted a copy signed, so I have copies with me now.
Okay.
Um,
Do we want to finish that part off the air?
yeah, I'm just going to say, I will sign one, and we can arrange how we're going to do that
Okay, great.
afterwards. But I have the copies here, so we can actually do that in the next couple of days and get
Okay.
that off to you, and you can actually read.
Fantastic. And then I can, you know, figure out how to get the money to you. Let me know what works. And
Oh, we'll talk about that. Yeah.
yeah.
Otherwise, don't know what else needs to be said at this stage.
I think
Have a look
this
at the
is
blog if you are still puzzling over what we've been talking about tonight. It's all sort of cut down into bite-sized chunks, and it's trying to talk about real life rather than create a story, which always kind of pulls you away from the argument you're trying to make sure that the story is at the same time is still a readable story for people who just want the yarn.
right.
Um, and I hope that everybody who's been listening tonight who does decide to go for it enjoys it, because that's what it's there for. At the end of the day, it's my views, but it's a story that I want people to enjoy reading.
Right.
So
And all of
enjoy.
it is, I can't recommend Tim's work highly enough. I just can't. And I'm pretty fussy. I'm hard to please. So, um, let's see. This has gone on. We've been on the air for a little over 2 hours now.
Mhm.
Um, I can't
I'm
thank you
definitely
enough.
starting to flag.
Yes, I can imagine. But I can't
Yeah.
thank you enough, Tim. This has been fascinating. And thank you for helping my brain work. Um,
Yeah. Well, I'm glad mine was working tonight.
yes.
If we'd had this 2 nights ago, 3 nights ago, it would have been a very different. Well, I think we probably would have had to just postpone it because there was no way I could have put these ideas together at all
Right.
a couple of nights ago.
I understand that. And we could
But
have.
hopefully I'm on the mend now. So
I'm I'm glad to hear that. And I will send you, it might be tomorrow, but I will get this up um on my YouTube channel, and it'll be up on the Simply Spooky Network Facebook page. I'll send you links
okay.
to spread out, because
I will
most
put
of the views come after the fact.
I will put a I will get onto my blog tomorrow and put up a advert for this. Literally, I went down with the flu about a day and a half after I put this up for sale. So I haven't done any of the advertising or
Oh
any of the
no.
blog posts about it or anything. So I will do a blog post about that tomorrow, and there will be links to both books on the blog
Okay, that'll
post.
be
So,
great,
you
because I
know,
can put that here then, and then I send
it
out.
should all start to knit together.
Yeah, and
Mm.
then when I have those links too, I send them out on my all of my social networking too, because I like to give you the
Well, I hope
support.
someone buys it.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. Uh, okay, well,
All
everybody,
right.
I want to thank you all for joining in, and let your friends know they want to watch this um, after the fact. And like I say, it'll probably be tomorrow, but I'll post the links on my Paranormal Insights Facebook, my personal Facebook, Para Insights Facebook, and Paranormal Insights Instagram and YouTube. And Tim will have the links too. So good night, everybody. Take care.
Good night, and thank you for listening.